Hello, fight fans, and welcome to another edition of Monday Night Fight Talk. As always, I am your host, Dylan Brewski. Thank you all so much for being patient with me. I know last week I wasn't able to do a show. I had a really bad bout with COVID. I was still getting over it last week at the beginning of the week, so I wasn't able to do this show, but I'm back now. Hopefully as good as I used to be. Because we have a wild show after a wild event just 48 hours ago. One of the craziest endings, if not the absolute craziest ending I have ever seen to a UFC event. It was a complete and utter disaster. Probably the worst case scenario ever for a UFC event like this one. So this is going to be a crazy show. I am going to break it up a little bit too. I'm going to start out by talking about UFC 282, some of the fights leading up to before the co-main and main, because some of Bellator 289 kind of ties in to the ending of Bellator 289 ties in to the ending of UFC 282. So I'm going to break it up a little bit, and then also after that, we have an update on UFC 283 for those that haven't heard. Stay tuned for that, and also I'll be giving my predictions for UFC Fight Night, headlined by Jared Cannonier and Sean Strickland, our last fight night of the year before the UFC takes a month off, which will obviously not be that much fun, but that's all right. We'll survive 1 month without the UFC. So let's get started. Some of the fights I want to talk about, there's actually quite a few I want to talk about from UFC 282 because this was a great event. This was a very exciting event, especially leading up to the co-main and the main events. We had all finishes before the co-main and main event, so that's obviously always exciting. But the first fight I'm going to talk about is Chris Curtis versus Joaquin Buckley. A very, very big fight for both of these guys in the middleweight division. Chris Curtis is coming off of his first loss in the UFC against Jack Hermanson earlier this year. Very controversial. Not controversial in the sense that people thought he won, but there was some antics after the fight that people didn't really like. But he showed up. He had a pretty good fight. I think Joaquin Buckley came out and had a very good game plan. He was the more active fighter. He was the more in-your-face fighter. I think he clearly took round one. I think it was very clear that Joaquin Buckley took round one. But Chris Curtis, all he needed was one singular opening, and he took advantage of it. He caught a kick that Joaquin Buckley threw and then just threw a right hook or a left hook from down under in hell and completely dropped Joaquin Buckley. Was able to get the second round TKO victory. This was probably the biggest win of Chris Curtis's career in the UFC, at least. So congratulations to him for capitalizing on that opportunity and getting the TKO victory. The next two, there's not a whole lot to talk about, especially this one, Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Chris Daukaus. Just a quick shout out to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I mean, dude knocked him out in under 30 seconds. That's always big, especially against a fellow ranked fighter. I believe Chris Daukaus was either 10 or 11, so we're talking about a decently ranked fighter coming into this fight, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik was able to pull out a very quick win. And then the premier prelim of the night. I don't know how you talk about UFC 282 without talking about this 18-year-old's impressive performance. Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Jay Perrin. There was actually some bad blood leading into this fight. Jay Perrin was talking a lot of crap, trying to get into Raul Rosas' head a little bit. I mean, he is only 18 years old. He probably thought he could maybe get a leg up on him by doing that, but Rosas did not even flinch. He took him to the ground very quickly, was able to get on his back, sink in the neck crank, rear naked choke, and get the quick victory. So congratulations to him. Congratulations to him on getting the bonus that he says he's going to give to his mom to buy a minivan. Say what you want about that, but that's freaking awesome in my opinion. A guy thinking about his mom for his first bonus in the UFC. Congratulations to the kid, Raul Rosas Jr. Very, very impressive victory in your UFC debut. Next one, the fight I was most excited for leading into this, Bryce Mitchell taking on Ilia Topuria. Turned out to not be as close as I thought it was going to be. I thought these two were just going to go at it, and it was going to be a 3-round war and probably end in a split decision. But Ilia Topuria had the perfect game plan, and he executed that game plan to absolute perfection. He had a huge advantage in the stand-up. He was throwing bombs at Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell looked like he went through a war of 25 minutes after a round and a half with Ilia Topuria. And Ilia Topuria also proved that his ground game is up to par. He has a very, very good ground game. Was able to get the submission victory over Bryce Mitchell. You don't say that. A lot of people wouldn't even dare to go to the ground with Bryce Mitchell, even if they had him hurt. Let alone go. I believe Ilia Topuria actually went for the takedown, or he reversed it and then willingly went down on the ground with Bryce Mitchell and got the submission victory. By far the most impressive victory of Topuria's career. I think this dude is legit a title contender in the future. Obviously going to need a few more wins before he's in that discussion. But I mean, this guy is absolutely unbelievable. Next up, Darren Till and Dricus du Plessis. The clear fight of the night. It got rewarded that this was without a doubt the fight of the night in my opinion. First round was clear for du Plessis, getting 3 takedowns, attempting 3 submissions, had 10 times the amount of significant strikes. 60-6 was the final numbers of the first round. Just a complete domination for du Plessis. Round 2, du Plessis, he even admitted it. He was definitely in recovery mode in that second round. Darren Till, definitely. I think Darren Till may have won the round. It was a close round. Till had a huge advantage on the feet, but du Plessis did get 2 takedowns. He did attempt 3 submissions. So it could have gone either way, round 2. And then round 3, kind of the same thing. Till was able to get some good shots in on the feet, but he just had no answer for the wrestling, the grappling of du Plessis. He was able to get the takedown, slid right into mount. He didn't even have to attempt to get to mount. He landed basically in mount, got Till's back, choked him out, got the victory. Another big win for an up-and-coming guy in du Plessis. I think he's another guy in that middleweight division that I see going very far. He is very impressive. Just needs to work out some kinks, not blow your entire gas tank in that first round and then have to take a whole round to recover. But I think he'll definitely look back on that and learn from his previous mistakes. Huge win for him. Congratulations to him. It does sound like Darren Till's probably going to be out for a while. It sounds like he tore his ACL. So that's pretty lame. Darren Till's always an exciting fighter, even if he hasn't had the greatest of success as of late. But congratulations again to Dricus du Plessis. And then the last fight, Santiago Ponzinibbio taking on Alex Morono. Alex Morono taking this fight on about 5 days' notice, with Robbie Lawler unfortunately having to pull out. But this was a crazy comeback for Santiago Ponzinibbio. It really seemed like Alex Morono was probably up 2-0 going into that third round. And Ponzinibbio's corner lit a fire under his butt and told him straight up, you are down 2-0, knock him out. And that is exactly what he did. Came out throwing, landed 2 big strikes. Morano tried to argue it. I don't know how you sit there and try to argue that. You were definitely out. Ponzinibbio got a victory, a TKO victory. Huge congratulations to him. That's a big win for him coming off the Michel Pereira fight earlier this year. So this is where I'm going to shift into Bellator 289 before the co-main and main event of UFC 282. I'm going to talk about 3 of the fights, and then there was a judging controversy in the main event of this fight. So first off, before I get to the main event of Bellator 282, talk about the other semifinal bantamweight for the bantamweight division in the Grand Prix for the bantamweights. Patchy Mix taking on Magomedov. A very fun fight to watch between 2 of the best bantamweights. Obviously, they're in the semifinals of the Bellator Bantamweight Grand Prix. Going at it, I honestly thought Magomed would have a much better showing than he did. He seemed to really struggle with Patchy Mix. Patchy Mix just really controlled where this fight went the entire time. He was able to neutralize the striking of Magomed and was able to get him to the ground and choke him unconscious to move on to the finals. So congratulations to Patchy Mix. That was a huge victory for him. The co-main event, Liz Carmouche taking on Juliana Vasquez. This was 1,000% the greatest outcome that Liz Carmouche could have wished for. I don't know if you guys remember, earlier this year, she won the belt off of Juliana Vasquez, off of a very controversial stoppage by referee Mike Beltran. Liz Carmouche had her in a crucifix, was putting some elbows, but there wasn't a whole lot going into the elbows. And then I think Juliana Vasquez, I think the fight was stopped too early. 100%. It was stopped too early. But Liz Carmouche, one of the OGs of women's MMA, I believe I saw something that she was a part of the first ever women's MMA bout in UFC history. So very awesome to see her win this next fight, the second fight, the rematch with Juliana Vasquez. And she left no controversy. She completely dominated, got the armbar victory. So congratulations to Liz Carmouche for silencing those doubters and putting yourself as the true champion of the flyweight division over in Bellator. And now for the main event, Rafion Stotts, the Bellator interim bantamweight champion, taking on Danny Sabatello. There was some bad blood coming into this fight. I mean, I'm sure if you pay attention to anything involving MMA, you saw that these two do not like each other. They were talking smack the whole time, and it was a great fight. It was a back and forth fight. Both guys had good rounds. Personally, I agree with the 2 judges that scored it for Stotts. I thought it was 48-47, Rafion Stotts. But Doug Crosby, who ended up judging for the co-main at UFC 282, scored it 50-45 for Danny Sabatello. The first time in recorded MMA history that a fighter that lost the fight got scored a 50-45. I don't know what you can do to fix judging, because I personally do not know what goes into judging MMA. Like, I know the rules, like the damage and control, striking. Like, I get it from a very basic standpoint. But I don't see how you could have that much of a different view on a fight than 2 other judges. If he would have scored it 48-47 for Sabatello, we're not having this conversation. I think that there was an argument that was 48-47 for Sabatello. I wouldn't have scored it that way. I would have scored it, like I said, like the other 2 judges did, with the 48-47 for Rafion Stotts. That's what I personally had it as. 50-45 to a fighter that lost should raise some major red flags. And then he flies across the country to Las Vegas the next night, and he's part of 3 judges that 1,000% robbed Jared Gordon of this win. I tweeted this last night. I usually don't call fights robberies. I can usually see how you see a fight going the other way. There's been some times like the Petr Yan-Sean O'Malley fight a couple months ago where I was pretty confident that Petr Yan won the fight. They gave it to Sean O'Malley, though. It was a close fight. Sean O'Malley had some really good moments in that fight. And that's not to say Paddy Pimblett didn't have good moments. He did. But when you look at it, round one, Jared Gordon landed 11 more strikes, and a lot of his strikes were cleaner. He couldn't miss with the left hook. I think, personally, Jared Gordon got round one. Round two was incredibly close. This was the one round I didn't know. I think it could have gone either way. I had no problems if they gave it to Paddy. I had no problems if they gave it to Jared Gordon. I do not care. Fine either way. Round three, dead even on strikes. Dead even on strikes. Paddy Pimblett had two more significant strikes. It was 6-4. Jared Gordon gets two takedowns and controls him for a majority of the round. I truly do not see any way that Paddy Pimblett won two of those rounds. And for all three judges to score for Paddy Pimblett, including Doug Crosby, who just scored at 50-45 for a losing fighter the night before, this was a horrible decision. This was honestly probably the biggest robbery I've ever seen in my time watching MMA. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that Jared Gordon didn't win this fight. I think it's absolutely criminal that Jared Gordon didn't win this fight. And I think Paddy Pimblett, I hope he got a huge wake-up call. Nothing. This is kind of a sidetrack from the judge conversation, but Paddy Pimblett needs to realize that he has a lot to work on. Because if Jared Gordon's doing that to him, he ain't competing with Arman Tsarukyan. He ain't competing with Rafael Fiziev, Damir Ismagulov, Jalen Turner. I mean, they're going to destroy him if he ends up being in that position in his next fight. It was a very, very unfortunate night for Jared Gordon. I feel for him. I was angry last night. I was legitimately angry that Jared Gordon did not win this fight. And that's nothing against Paddy. I actually like Paddy. I think I was telling my dad, I texted my dad last night. Paddy has my favorite walkout in UFC history. Just his way to capture the crowd the way that he does is absolutely amazing to me. I like Paddy Pimblett. He didn't win this fight. I think it's absolutely ludicrous to even sit there for a second and think he won this fight. And now for the main event. What a wild way to end. So, I mean, as we know, UFC 282 was incredibly shaken up with Yuri Prochazka going down with that very serious shoulder injury, vacating the title. Co-main moves up to the main event between Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. And it was a good fight. It wasn't the most exciting fight, but I saw this fight going either way. I was upset last night about that decision, but I think it was just right after, it was the circumstance of being right after the Paddy Pimblett decision where he got the win and no one, I think I've seen like one or two people on Twitter, and like that is legitimately one or two people say that they believe that Paddy Pimblett won that fight. And then this happens where, again, truthfully, I saw the fight going either way. I personally scored it 49-46 for Magomed, with the only round he lost being the second round. But rounds 1 and 3 were incredibly close. Round 1 was separated by 5 strikes. In terms, Magomed had 5 more landed strikes than Jan Blachowicz. 5 strikes, whatever. I could see them scoring that for Jan Blachowicz. Round 3, looking at the numbers, it looks like if you only looked at the stats, you would be like, Magomed Ankalaev destroyed this round. But Jan Blachowicz's leg kicks were just destroying Magomed's leg. Magomed at one point didn't have either of his legs being in good shape whatsoever. But then he got a takedown in the second half of the round and was able to control Jan Blachowicz for the rest of the round. Round 2, Jan Blachowicz won, 100%. Rounds 4 and 5, Magomed Ankalaev won, easily. Now, 2 of the judges gave round 5 a 50 or a 10-8. I think that's a little much. I think Magomed controlled the round, obviously, for a big majority of that round. But he didn't do enough damage, in my eyes, to constitute a 10-8. But either way, we end up with a split draw and no champion. I feel for both of these guys. I mean, Jan Blachowicz is just such a class act. It's unbelievable. Taking the mic from Joe, saying, give the title to Magomed Ankalaev. He thought Magomed Ankalaev won. Magomed Ankalaev was very upset, and I think a little bit rightfully so. Again, I don't want to... This one I'm not putting on the judges, because this was a very, very tough fight to call. But it sucks with the co-main event happening and that controversy, and then right after you have a vacant light heavyweight title on the line, and now it's still vacant. Very unfortunate ending to a fun pay-per-view, though. I mean, regardless of how it ended, that was a very, very fun event to watch. And then UFC 283, right after they announced the main card for UFC 283, not even an hour after UFC 282 gets closed, there's now a new main event for next month's pay-per-view, UFC 283 down in Brazil. Dana White comes in the press conference and announces that UFC 283 next month will be headlined by former champ Glover Teixeira taking on Jamal Hill for the vacant light heavyweight title. This is absolutely wild. I can't say I've ever seen anything like that. Davidson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno 4 will now be the co-main event. I think that's a solid pay-per-view. Adding this fight makes this a very good pay-per-view in my eyes. The only thing that did suck, though, Jamal Hill was scheduled to face Anthony Smith in March. Obviously, that fight is more than likely off. The worst thing about that is Anthony Smith learned live on TV on the UFC post-fight show that fight is now off. And you could tell he was trying to be very professional. He was trying to hide a lot of his frustrations, but you could tell it was there. And I think he said it perfect. Someone owes him a favor. I think whatever fight he wants next, to a certain extent, I mean, don't give him Glover Teixeira or one of the really, really top-notch guys. But I think you do owe him a favor. I mean, come on, you're taking this guy. That was a main event. That was going to be a main event, and they took that from him. So very lame to see that. But also, I am excited to see Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. I think that's going to be a very, very fun fight. Kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum, where you have Glover Teixeira, the veteran, been around for years, and then you have Jamal Hill, one of the fastest up-and-coming prospects in the light heavyweight division. So very, very fun to see that for those two guys, and hopefully after another month we can finally have a light heavyweight champion again. But that's enough for all that crazy weekend in terms of MMA. But let's get into some fight predictions. I have, I believe, four fights to talk about for UFC Fight Night, headlined by Jared Cannonier, Sean Strickland. The first fight will be in the flyweight division. David Dvorak taking on Manel Kape. A very fun fight in the flyweight division between two very well-rounded fighters. Cape will have the advantage in momentum and also in offensive grappling. I say offensive grappling because Dvorak has very good takedown defense, and even though he has not landed a takedown in the UFC at all, he hasn't even attempted one, he has his only finish is by rear naked choke. So he's very good off of his back. He's very good at getting himself out of bad positions. But like I said, Cape is coming in winning his last two fights, but this is a huge step up in competition compared to his last two opponents. David Dvorak was on an incredible win streak, 16 before his last fight against Matisse Nicolau, where his streak was snapped. Matisse Nicolau kind of dominated him in that fight. It will be very interesting to see where this fight ends up. I'm not sure if Manel Cape will try to take it to the ground as much. I could see it going a little bit more stand-up than we're used to with these two guys. But I'm going Manel Cape by decision. Next up is Said Nurmagomedov taking on Said Yokub Kakramanov. One of the hardest opponent matchups I've ever had to say. I felt the need to talk about this fight because I feel a lot of people will overlook this fight and shouldn't. I think these are two of the best up-and-coming fighters in the UFC. Both have found great success in the octagon, with Kakramanov winning his first two fights in the octagon and Nurmagomedov winning 5 out of 6, including his last 3. Now, Nurmagomedov will be a humongous step up in competition for Kakramanov. With that big step up in competition, I don't think Said Yokum is quite ready yet. I'm going Said Nurmagomedov by decision. And then that will lead us to the co-main event of the evening. Arman Tsarukyan taking on Damir Ismagulov. I am so pumped for this fight. Two of the best up-and-coming fighters in all of the UFC. I feel like I've said that on like 15 different fights today. But this truly means that both guys... I think both of these guys could challenge for the title at some point in their career. Damir Ismagulov has a 19-fight winning streak in pro MMA, including his first 5 fights in the UFC, and coming off of one of the best fights this year in a very, very close bout with Guillaume Kutateladze. Arman Tsarukyan has an incredibly bright future. This guy is only 26 years old and is absolutely unbelievable, especially in the grappling department. He has won 5 of his 7 UFC bouts. His only losses coming to the current champ, Islam Makhachev, in his first fight in the UFC, and then his last fight in a 5-round war that could have gone either way to Mateusz Gamrot. Ismagulov, I think, is definitely the better fighter on the feet, while Tsarukyan will definitely try and get this fight to the ground. I see him being able to do that, and I have Tsarukyan winning by 3rd round submission, snapping the 19-fight win streak for Damir Ismagulov. And now for the main event, our last main event of the year in the UFC. Jared Cannonier taking on Sean Strickland, a fight with huge stakes in the middleweight division between two guys looking to get back on the winning side after losing on the same night in July to Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira, respectively. Both guys are well-rounded, but are more comfortable keeping the fight on the feet. Jared Cannonier has unbelievable power. I mean, this guy's a former heavyweight, light heavyweight, now middleweight, so he does have the one-punch knockout power. He is incredibly powerful. And then you have Sean Strickland, who is looking to boost himself into the title picture for a chance at either another shot at Alex Pereira or Israel Adesanya, whatever it may be. He's looking to put himself in that top 5 and very quickly. This is going to be a hard-fought fight. I could see both guys catching the other one, but I am going to go with Sean Strickland winning this fight by third round TKO. Again, that is all I have for you this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Next week, we will be going over my reaction to UFC Fight Night, Cannonier versus Strickland. I believe that's all we have in terms of MMA. So if there is any other news, I'll certainly be talking about that as well. But until then, I will see you all next week for Monday Night Fight Talk. Same time, same place on YouTube for Monday Night Fight Talk.